Have you ever wondered what happens when someone is judged, not by who they are, but by what they wear? Imagine walking into a showroom filled with millions of dollars worth of luxury cars, gleaming under the bright lights, polished to perfection, and being dismissed instantly because of a hoodie. What if I told you the man in that hoodie didn't just come to browse? He secretly owned everything in sight. This is the story of Daryl Carter, a man who walked into his own dealership dressed like an ordinary customer, only to uncover the raw truth about the people he trusted to represent his brand. A casual hoodie, a luxury showroom, and one jaw-dropping reveal that left everyone stunned. Stay with me, because what happens inside those glass walls will change everything you think you know about respect, judgment, and second chances. Pause. Soft background score builds suspense. The desert sun beat down on Scottsdale, Arizona that afternoon. The air shimmered with heat, but inside Prestige Motors, the air conditioning hummed over spotless cars that sparkled like jewels. Employees stood at the front desk, laughing quietly among themselves, unaware of the storm that was about to walk through their doors. And then Daryl entered. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers, no suit, no polished watch, just a quiet step into the empire he now owned. But nobody knew who he really was. And that's where our story begins. The moment Daryl stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere shifted. The cold air inside the dealership wrapped around him, carrying with it the faint scent of polished leather and waxed chrome. Rows of pristine cars stood like soldiers in formation, each one silently boasting its six-figure price tag under the brilliance of overhead lights. The laughter at the front desk faltered. Conversations cut short. Eyes darted toward him, not with warmth, not with welcome, but with quick, assessing glances. A hoodie, worn sneakers, no Rolex flashing at his wrist. Just another man who, in their minds, couldn't possibly belong in a place like Prestige Motors. Daryl noticed everything. The subtle tilt of one salesman's head, the whisper behind a cupped hand, the polite but fleeting smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. They thought he didn't belong, but instead of anger, he felt a calm curiosity. This was exactly why he had come dressed this way. He didn't want the red carpet treatment of an owner. He wanted to see the truth. And then, she appeared. Susan, the manager, mid-40s, confident stride, polished blazer sharp enough to cut glass. Clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge of authority. She didn't waste time. Her heels clicked against the glossy tile as she approached him, her smile professional but strained, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Daryl's lips curled into a faint smile. "Just here to look around." But that wasn't enough for Susan. Her gaze swept over him. Hoodie, sneakers, jeans, and the mask slipped. Her polite smile tightened into something colder. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, the doubt in her voice impossible to hide. Daryl nodded. "Something like that." And in that moment, a battle of assumptions began. Because what Susan didn't realize was that every word, every gesture, every judgment she made would soon come back to her in a way she could never imagine. But first, Daryl was going to let her show her true colors. Susan's eyes lingered on Daryl's hoodie as though it were a warning sign. She tilted her head, her smile polite but stiff, her voice carrying a sharpened edge. "Well," she began slowly, "we cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I could recommend." Her words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. She didn't see a customer. She saw a waste of time. Daryl's smile never faded, though inside, he felt the sting of her assumptions. He let a beat of silence hang in the air before asking lightly, "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" The question caught her off guard. For the briefest moment, her composure cracked, but only for a second. Her shoulders straightened, and she recovered with a forced smile. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said briskly. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to—" She didn't finish. Another employee called her name, distracting her briefly, but her eyes never left Daryl, as though he might scuff the showroom floor if she looked away too long. Darryl chuckled softly, running his hand along the sleek silver coupe beside him. Its curves gleamed under the lights, reflecting his calm expression. "Nice car," he said casually. Susan's brows twitched, but she forced another smile. "It is. Perhaps, when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." The words landed heavy. Darryl stepped back, hands slipping into his pockets, his tone still light. "All right then, let's hear it. What would you recommend for someone like me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Susan blinked, caught between irritation and disbelief. "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly," she said carefully. "I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Darryl's faint smile hardened at the edges. He'd seen enough. "That's quite the assumption," he said softly. For the first time, Susan faltered. But this was only the beginning, because what she didn't know was that the man she was trying to dismiss would soon hold her entire career in his hands. Susan disappeared for a few moments, the sound of her heels fading into the back offices. The air in the showroom felt heavier now, the employees exchanging whispers while sneaking curious glances at Darryl. To them, he was just a man lingering where he didn't belong. When she returned, clipboard in hand, her stride was brisk, her expression tight. She stopped a few feet away from him, forcing another professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All right," she said, her tone clipped. "I've compiled a few options that might be more suitable for your situation." Darryl tilted his head, his calm demeanor unwavering. "My situation?" he repeated softly. "Yes," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. She handed him a printout filled with pre-owned vehicles, older sedans, compact hybrids, an SUV with more miles on it than prestige. Models that didn't belong in a showroom where the cheapest car cost more than most people's homes. "These are reliable," Susan continued, her voice dropping as if she were confiding a secret. "Practical, economical, accessible." Darryl unfolded the paper, scanning the page in silence. Each word on that list was an echo of her judgment. His lips twitched in faint amusement, but he hid it well. Folding the sheet carefully, he slipped it into his pocket and looked back at her. "Appreciate the effort," he said evenly. Susan blinked, surprised by his composure. She had expected irritation, or maybe embarrassment, but instead, his calmness unsettled her. She shifted her weight, clipboard clutched tighter in her hands like a shield. "Listen," she said firmly, her voice dipping into impatience. "I've been doing this a long time. I can tell when someone's out of their depth. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone, and that's okay. I don't want to waste your time." Darryl's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, his voice still calm but laced with quiet steel. "Out of my depth? Interesting." The words hung heavy between them. Around them, the staff paused, watching. Nobody said a word, but the tension was thick enough to slice through. Susan pressed on, her confidence faltering but her pride refusing to let go. "It's better to be honest up front than to have someone leave disappointed." Darryl chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Honest, huh? I like honesty." He stepped closer, his tone steady. "How about this, you let me speak to the owner? Think we can make that happen?" For the first time, Susan's confident mask cracked completely. Her eyes widened. "The owner?" she echoed, her voice uncertain. "That's right," Darryl said, smiling faintly. "I'd like to have a word with them." And just like that, the balance of power in the room began to shift. Because Susan had no idea she was standing face to face with the very man she was trying so hard to dismiss. Susan's lips curled into a smile that was more defensive than genuine. She adjusted the clipboard in her hands, her polished composure slipping like a mask that no longer fit. "Well, that's not possible today," she said briskly. "The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a very busy person." Darryl tilted his head, the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I'm sure they are," he replied evenly. "But maybe you could give them a call. Let them know I'm here. I think they'd want to meet me." Her jaw tightened. That calm tone, too calm, was beginning to unnerve her. She tried to shut it down, fast. Look, sir. I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to. If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants. Otherwise, Darryl raised a brow, his voice sharpening ever so slightly. Otherwise what? The words cut clean through the polished hum of the showroom. Conversations stalled. Eyes turned. Employees who had been pretending to shuffle paperwork or check emails froze. Their attention locked on the unfolding confrontation. Susan hesitated, but pride pushed her forward. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The weight of her words dropped like a stone in the middle of the showroom. Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. Darryl didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out his phone with deliberate calm. His thumb slid across the screen. All right, he said almost casually. I'll make the call myself. Susan blinked, caught off guard. What are you doing? Darryl lifted the phone to his ear, his voice even, his gaze fixed on her. Just calling the owner. Won't take long. The room seemed to hold its breath. Employees shifted uncomfortably, the tension now palpable, pressing against every polished wall of the dealership. Susan's confidence faltered, confusion replacing irritation. Who exactly are you calling? She asked, her voice quieter now, the authority in it slipping away. Darryl didn't answer immediately. He just smiled faintly as the line connected. And in that moment, Susan's world began to tilt. Because what she thought was a simple dismissal was about to turn into the most shocking reveal of her career. Darryl turned slightly away, phone pressed to his ear, his voice calm but commanding. Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership, he said. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here? He ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket with the same casual ease he'd walked in with. Then he turned back to Susan. They'll be here shortly, he said simply. The words dropped into the silence like thunder. Susan stared, her mouth parting slightly, the confidence draining from her face. They'll be here? She stammered, confusion thick in her voice. Who exactly did you just call? Darryl didn't answer right away. He let the question hang, his eyes scanning the showroom. A few employees had stopped mid-task, one holding a stack of papers, another frozen with a phone in his hand. They all waited, the tension stretching like a wire about to snap. Darryl finally spoke, his tone almost playful. Guess we'll find out. Minutes passed, but each second felt stretched thin. Susan fidgeted with her clipboard, her movements stiff and mechanical, betraying the unease behind her practiced mask. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to appear busy, yet every glance darted back to Darryl. The employees whispered in hushed tones, their curiosity rising. Who was this man? Why did he speak with such confidence? And then the sound. The main doors opened with a soft click, and the air shifted instantly. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit strode inside, polished shoes tapping against the tiles with measured authority. His presence was magnetic, his gaze sweeping across the room until it landed directly on Darryl. Mr. Carter, the man said, breaking into a wide smile as he extended his hand. So good to see you. The room froze. Susan's clipboard slipped slightly in her grip, nearly tumbling to the floor. Her eyes widened as the name echoed in her mind. Mr. Carter, the new owner, the man in the hoodie. Her assumptions had just collapsed in front of everyone. But the real sting wasn't just the reveal, it was what came next, when Darryl decided to confront the very culture that allowed this judgment to exist. The man in the suit, Alex, the regional director, clasped Darryl's hand firmly, his respect obvious in every gesture. His voice carried through the silent showroom, leaving no room for doubt. Susan, Alex said, turning sharply, his professional smile fading into something much colder. I see you've already met Mr. Carter. The words hit harder than any reprimand could. Mr. Carter, the owner. Susan blinked, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The confidence, The clipped tone, the professional edge. It all drained from her like water slipping through cupped hands. She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize. You didn't realize he's the new owner of this dealership. Alex finished for her, his tone flat and sharp. Gasps rippled quietly among the staff. The salesman who had been smirking earlier now stood rooted in place, their expressions caught between shock and embarrassment. A receptionist covered her mouth, eyes darting between Susan and Daryl. Daryl raised a hand gently, his voice calm but resonant. It's all right, Alex. I think Susan and I just got off on the wrong foot. But his words carried weight. They weren't an escape hatch for Susan. They were a mirror, forcing everyone in the room to look at themselves. Susan's face went pale. Her clipboard was now clutched to her chest, not as a tool but as a shield. She tried to recover, her voice trembling. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Daryl stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm, each word deliberate. Didn't know what? That someone like me could own a place like this? That a hoodie and sneakers mean I don't belong here? Susan froze, caught in the truth of his words. The silence that followed was unbearable. The employees stood still, guilt painting their faces as though Daryl's words weren't just for her, but for all of them. Daryl let the silence stretch, his gaze sweeping the room. Then he spoke again, softer now, but sharper in meaning. If I hadn't been the owner, would I have been treated any differently today? Would I have been given the same respect as the man who walks in wearing a suit and tie? Susan lowered her gaze, unable to answer. The silence was its own verdict. But Daryl wasn't finished. Because what happened next wasn't about punishment, it was about leadership, and about reshaping the culture of Prestige Motors from the inside out. The silence in the showroom was broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling lights. Susan stood frozen, clutching her clipboard, her earlier authority completely gone. Daryl straightened, his calm presence commanding the room without raising his voice. He looked around at every face, salesmen, receptionists, even the service techs who had wandered in from the garage to see the commotion. Everyone, he said evenly, conference room, now. There was no anger in his tone, but something about it allowed no hesitation. Chairs scraped, shoes shuffled, and one by one the staff moved quickly, almost nervously, toward the glass-walled conference room. Inside, the room buzzed with unease. No one wanted to speak first. Susan sat stiffly at the far end of the table, her clipboard resting uselessly in front of her. The salesmen exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier cocky smirks nowhere to be found. Daryl entered last. He closed the door gently behind him, then remained standing at the head of the table. His presence filled the room, not through power or intimidation, but through quiet authority. Before we go any further, he began, his voice steady, I want you all to understand something. He paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This isn't about embarrassing anyone. This isn't about punishment. But today gave me a very clear picture of what kind of culture exists inside Prestige Motors. He walked slowly along the length of the table, meeting the eyes of each staff member in turn. Some looked down at their notepads. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What I saw when I walked through those doors, he continued, was judgment. I saw people being measured by their clothes, by their appearance, by assumptions made in the first 30 seconds. That is not how we treat people here. Not customers. Not coworkers. Not anyone. The room stayed silent. Even Alex leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression neutral but attentive. Daryl stopped walking and rested his hands lightly on the back of a chair. You all had a chance to show me what this dealership stands for. Instead, you showed me what happens when bias runs unchecked. And if this is how I was treated as your owner, imagine how many customers have walked out those doors, never to return, because they were treated the same way. A ripple of realization moved through the room. The weight of those words landed harder than any lecture could. Susan shifted in her seat, her voice cracking as she tried to speak. I didn't mean. Daryl raised a hand gently to stop her. I know you didn't mean it, but meaning isn't the same as impact. And the impact of what happened today is unacceptable. Then Daryl leaned forward, his voice lowering into something both challenging and inspiring. So here's how we move forward. Starting today, we're going to rebuild the culture of Prestige Motors from the ground up. Daryl let the silence hang in the conference room a few moments longer, making sure every word he was about to say would land. Then he straightened up, his voice carrying steady conviction. Prestige Motors will not be known for fancy cars alone. We will be known for how we treat people, every single person who walks through that door, whether they're wearing a suit, a uniform, or coveralls. Respect isn't optional here. It's the standard. Several staff members shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared interrupt. Daryl continued, starting today, we are building a culture on 3 pillars: respect, integrity, accountability. He raised a finger with each word. Respect, he said firmly, means greeting every customer as if they belong here, because they do. It means treating your coworkers with dignity, no matter their position. No more assumptions, no more snap judgments. He paused, then added, integrity means doing the right thing when nobody's watching. If a customer has a question, we give them honest answers. If there's a problem, we don't hide it, we fix it. Finally, his tone sharpened slightly. And accountability means we own our actions. If we make a mistake, we don't point fingers. We take responsibility. We learn. We do better. A few people nodded slowly. Even Alex, usually skeptical and smug, leaned forward, listening more closely now. Daryl softened his tone but kept it firm. This dealership is not just a place to sell cars. It's a place where people should feel valued. Customers should leave knowing they were respected. Employees should leave knowing their work means something. Susan sat with her eyes lowered, her face flushed with shame. But Daryl didn't linger on her. This wasn't about one person, it was about everyone in the room. He concluded with quiet force. If anyone feels they cannot uphold these values, speak now. Because moving forward, these are not suggestions. They are requirements. The room stayed utterly silent. No one spoke. No one stood. Daryl gave a small nod. Good. Then tomorrow we start fresh. Together. But as the meeting ended and the staff shuffled out, Daryl knew the real challenge was still ahead, proving that his words weren't just promises, but a lasting change. The meeting adjourned with a heavy silence. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, and employees filed out in small clusters, whispering under their breath. The air still buzzed with the weight of Daryl's words. In the hallway, some wore thoughtful expressions. Others looked irritated, even defiant. Alex, the salesman with the sharp tongue, muttered just loud enough for his buddy to hear. Respect, integrity, accountability. Sounds like a poster, not a paycheck. Let's see how long this new chief thing lasts. He smirked, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. A few feet away, Lisa, a younger employee who had quietly endured the dealership's toxic culture, felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. For the first time since joining Prestige, she believed maybe things could change. Back in her office, Susan sat stiffly at her desk, staring at the screen but not working. Her humiliation still stung. The image of Daryl revealing himself replayed in her mind, over and over. She clenched her jaw. He embarrassed me in front of everyone. But deeper down, she also knew he was right. Meanwhile, Daryl remained in the conference room, gathering his notes. Alone now, he exhaled slowly. This was just the beginning. Words alone wouldn't shift a culture built on years of bad habits. He would need persistence, patience, and unshakable resolve. But he wasn't discouraged. Instead, a faint smile touched his lips. He had seen the fear in some eyes, the doubt in others, and most importantly, the spark of belief in a few. That was enough. Change always starts with tension, he reminded himself. And tension means we're moving forward. But what Daryl didn't yet know was that resistance was already forming in the shadows, and not everyone was ready to embrace the new order. That evening, long after Daryl had left the building, small groups of employees lingered in the break room. The sound of the vending machine hummed as whispers spread like wildfire. Alex leaned back in his chair, arms folded. So what? Now we got about a Mr. Hoodie, he scoffed. I don't buy it. Guy shows up dressed like a college dropout and suddenly he's preaching values? I'll play along. But let's see how long this act lasts. A few others chuckled nervously. Some nodded in agreement. But not everyone. Lisa, sitting quietly at the corner table, listened without joining in. She was tired of the toxic culture, tired of the judgment, tired of being treated like she didn't belong. For her, Daryl's words weren't just a speech. They were a lifeline. And in that moment, the dealership split into two unspoken sides. Those clinging to old habits, and those ready for something new. Meanwhile, Daryl sat in his office at home, staring out the window into the desert night. The city lights of Scottsdale flickered in the distance. He knew the battle had only begun. Changing minds would take more than policies or speeches. It would take action, consistency, and a willingness to face backlash head-on. He smiled faintly, remembering the moment he first walked in wearing that hoodie. The smirks, the dismissals, the instant judgment. And how, with one reveal, everything shifted. This wasn't about cars. It wasn't even about business. It was about people. About respect. About proving that appearances mean nothing compared to integrity, vision, and leadership. We often look at others and decide who they are in a split second by their clothes, their tone, their status. But as Daryl Carter proved that day, true worth isn't worn on the outside. It's built in how you treat others, even when you think no one is watching. So the next time someone walks into your life in a hoodie, remember you might be looking at a stranger, or you might be looking at the person who owns the whole room. Because respect, at the end of the day, costs nothing. But its absence can cost everything.